Good day and welcome back to Elementary 72 Gaming. Now, in the past few weeks, I've obviously been keeping very quiet and I haven't been releasing a lot of content. However, today there is something special and it is going to be something useful for a lot of you guys. A lot of people have been experiencing this thing in wars where you can't really rehearse your battle plans on the field because everybody knows your battle plans, and obviously anybody with a brain will understand. All you've got to do to see someone's battle plan is go out to wherever their team flocks. And there is always someone watching over flocking teams because big teams attract attention. And that's one of the simplest things you can do. And open testing and open usage of tactics means that they're already noted by enemies and they have plans to quell those types of tactics. And since that's your only tactics that you're rehearsing, you kind of mess up your ability to deploy them in wars. Now, I'm actually going to go through something which is a bit more, how would I put this? A bit more brutal in terms of training, but it is a way for you to host training camps that are, number one, private, that only your teams can see, and that require you to work on a scale that is actually going to be more doable and usable. It's also going to mean that you're going to have to divide up your teams into groups of 5 instead of one person calling out 50 orders. And this here will help you in the long run because you need to be able to work in this type of concise manner, and then after that there's a second lot of training which comes up, and this is where things get real messy. So the first thing is, if you want to train privately in the real world, or not the real world, in the game world, you need to have instances that are locked out from public view. So you can't use arenas, you can't use OPR. OPR is not locked out from public view because if you have one random in the entire lobby, you're not going to go and count every single person's name and make sure that they are correct before you start moving out and running tactics. The moment tactics are shown and the moment weapons are shown, they already know what you are going to try and they can start counteracting it. However, if you decide to use something like dungeons, all of a sudden a lot of training becomes optional to you. Now, using a mutated dungeon is super expensive and would be unbelievably difficult for you to complete as a complete company, because going into a mutated dungeon requires completion and everybody wants the umbral shards from it, and that is one of the things that can become very costly on you. The next thing which you can do, just for the sake of the next thing that you can do just for the sake of getting a little bit of extra power is actually running into dungeons such as Lazarus and Genesis, removing all trophies that give you an edge over these enemies. Now understand, I'm talking about normal Lazarus, not mutated Lazarus. So you'll be going into a mutation, not a mutation, you'll be going into normal, and you will be facing enemies that are 550. So Lazarus 550 is not super deadly to you, and most of the times with your trophies on, you have such a massive advantage over the enemies that you just pile them over and beat them in one simple shot. However, by increasing the difficulty and having your players play without the trophies, those who are using major trophies have a massive advantage and are massively overpowered against the enemies. When you remove that advantage all of a sudden and they dump into the regular dungeon, you now can start your training. Number one, you run through as a team, and this is how it will go, and you will time your completion as a entire unit. So the 5-man team will go through on your first run through one of the dungeons. Lazarus is the easiest to run in the sense because there's only 2 points where you can get wiped, and the amount of difficulty from opponents isn't that hard. You can also do it in Genesis. The only problem is that you have problems with the Caretaker and with the Blight Watcher right at the end of the expedition. You also have some problems in between where if you try and do some of the tactics that I'm about to say that you're going to do for individual training, you will get wiped against those enemies because separating them isn't easy, and fighting in numbers is going to require you to fight huge numbers of enemies at a time. So yeah, that's the way in which it will go. So you will go in as a 5-man team. One of you will be a consul or an officer, because you have to break it up so that you can have 20 teams, one with the consul, one with the officer. And by offering a chance to go through a dungeon with the officers all having 3 orbs at their disposal, which isn't too difficult for you to get. Or you can pay one of your members to give you one of their orbs. Because it's a regular level dungeon, they're generally not going to complain too much because you're paying them for it to start with. And the company just has to expand a little bit of finance to actually finance these runs. Now, once you are in, one member has to be a healer. The healer is under strict instructions to only heal players if they are about to die. Do not heal them unless it is absolutely necessary. This means that fast-paced nature that we're so used to in the dungeon will be removed from the dungeon runs. Now, your first run is a standard run. You do it to complete the dungeon as fast as possible. This gives you something like a 20 minutes to work against. And 20 minutes for an entire team is quite easy to do. And when you're doing it with 20 teams for a complete company, or if you have 2 or 3 companies, you have about 60 teams running the dungeon. This is where things get real interesting. You can see who has the stronger formats, who has the stronger strategies, and this can be used to improve your actual gameplay. So, phase 1 of this year, you're going to run into example Lazarus or Genesis and complete the standard run. Then on the second run, you are going to separate out your team. If you have a tank, your tank will fall back during the standard encounter. When you aren't against a boss, obviously the bosses have to be run as you would in regular PvE. You're not going to fight them with the special tactics because it would be insane to try and make a single player kill bosses like the Caretaker or even the Blighted Watcher. The amount of damage you'll end up taking just from that one fight is beyond recognition. I can understand someone trying it against Celia, where I know that players have gone through with teams of full DPS and taken down the boss, and I know that you can 2-man or 3-man that boss if you have enough dodging and capabilities within your reach, because her attacks are quite hard, and if you are fast enough you can keep avoiding the wipe mechanics, and in the end of the day that is what you want. You want to have a very strong gameplay experience. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about the actual methodology behind this. So your team consists of 1 tank, 3 damage dealers. That's, the basic standard play that you're going to go for any standard encountered team. Now obviously if your teams require more damage dealers and you have full damage dealer teams with a single healer, that's fine. You can have 4 damage dealers and 1 healer. This will just make your encounters a little bit more difficult, and you'll require to put on way more damage way faster. So your first round of training, which is basically round 1, the healer pulls themselves out and your 3 damage dealers go in and they deal with mobs. Tanks can tank mobs quite easily. It's not something difficult for them to do, so your tank falls out of the equation. Your 3 damage dealers go in, they wipe out an entire area. You kill every single enemy. You don't skip over to make it faster. You must make sure you do this here so that your entire training goes at the right speed. As I said, healer will only heal if you are if you are about to die, to ensure that the healer has some aspect of support. Now for the tank and the healer, it is quite standard. Their training is on the boss. Every time they fight a boss, they get more and more experience in how to handle heavy hits and being pushed around. That makes your tank more durable for you, and some enemies jump around. That is something that a tank should go up against. So if you have a archer from the Angry Earth, you're going to throw in your tank against him to go and play against that. Your healer will start running around arenas and running around areas trying to hold off aggro from themselves and avoid being hit by attacks. That's all they have to do to actually train themselves up. The tank is not responsible for wiping out enemies. The tank is not responsible for taking down the enemy team. The tank just has to hold his ground. That means all he has to do is learn to stabilize himself against a boss. As soon as he can, that means he can hold himself against an enemy attack in a war. 1, 2, 3. These are simple strategies to play. Small little attacks from him that can be played in openings He has to learn how to do it without sustaining too much of damage. Remember, healer doesn't come to play unless he needs it urgently. So that is the way that you need to play your tanks. Your tanks need to play really hard in this format of the game. And remember, you don't have trophies to boost you, so your damage is lower. It's unlike what you're going to get when you have your trophies on. It also means that you have this high amount of difficulty for yourself because you're taking in more damage and you're doing less damage, so the enemies last a little bit longer against you. You also have a reduction in your team where you're 3-manning what can be 5-manned, and that is purely because it is training. So this is level 1. You run through, you complete the mobs with the 3-man team, trying not to heal them as much as possible. They have to rely on their own potions, they have to rely on their own food for most of it. They can use gemstone dust, they can use honing stones, and they can use food. Those are the 3 things which they can use that aren't going to have a big effect on the enemies. They can't use ancient wards, they can't use angry earth wards, they can't use coatings for their weapons. They just have to go standard. Now, fighting in this format does give you a lot of capability when it comes to the entire aspect of playing this type of style. Now, beyond this, there are other things you can do to actually work on your team play a little bit, and I'm going to explain it as I go through onto the next step. So, once you have managed to complete the dungeon with a 3-man frontal assault and everybody has managed to pull through, you can keep running it day after day. 1 or 2 hours of running dungeons like this here, players won't feel that neglected by it. They'll feel like they're doing something that's going to help them in the long run. They feel the bonus from it. They understand that it's going to help them in all aspects of the game because they're getting tougher and they're getting a better understanding of their weapons. Now, solo players already have this feeling to their weapons. It's one of the reasons why the solo players won't feel it being too difficult. They'll feel like they're getting back to where they started, and it might give them this extra thrill to keep them in the game. It might give your company a little bit more of a group activities type act to do, and you can start running them through elite zones and timing the elite zone runs with your entire company running as a group. These small advantages that you are making by improving your fighting style against dungeons, as I said, it will start with just regulars because mutated have a lot of constraints to them and you can't really afford to keep running mutated dungeons. They're very difficult and they're very expensive, and obviously you don't want people crying that they lost their mutated orbs to the company doing foolish things. And I don't think the company wants to exhaust their resources on making mutated orbs just for the sake of training. It's also quite expensive. So you've run your Lazarus, you've run your Genesis, you've done your 3 or 4 runs a day, you've made it through, you've done your training. At the end of the day, this training can be repeated as many times as a player is willing to do that activity. And for most people, they'd run Genesis 10 times in a day if they could. If they had a team who was there to help them, to play through with them, they'd go 10 times in a row because they know they can do it and they know that it's fun. They know there's a cash reward at the end of it. They know there's the scrapping reward from gear that they're picking up. They know that there's rewards in terms of gypsum coming out from their first 2 completions. You've given a person a massive advantage moving forward. The next thing to note on this exact same part that I'm talking about with the player going through dungeons is when you up the level of difficulty. The 3 DPS that you have will now start swapping out, where they go 2 DPS to wipe the area and 1 will sit back with the tank and the healer. But this is where the difficulty really comes into play. With 1 with the tank and healer, you are now going to swap up your tactics. The tank and healer combo now has a single DPS who is running with them. He is going to help with boss running. Now generally you're not going to allow this to be a melee DPS, you're going to allow this to be a range DPS. This allows you to get the use of using things like bows and muskets, and this is a level 2 training. This means once you have been able to do the dungeon completion flawlessly 2 times in a row, you're now going to employ the 2-man method. 2 men will now try and wipe an entire room. This improves their skills, this improves their dodge abilities, this improves the way they react to threats a lot bigger. And you're not going to try and hold out against small amount of mobs. You're going to pull the same mobs that you would have pulled as a 3-man team. This is improving your skills. You're going to take on a higher risk and you're going to try and beat it. Once you beat it, you up your level of skill to the level where you can now do without one person. The person who is helping the DPS with the tank is now helping learn a tactic for war, and that is wiping out the crucial member or wiping out to help your tank stay on a zone. It's small things that actually have a big impact later down the line, and these are simple training methods that any company can implement in New World. Now let's move on to the next step furthering this. As I said, 2 men to wipe out mob areas and 3 men to wipe out a boss. The other 2 will not participate in bosses because you have just upped the level of difficulty. You keep running this method till you get 2 in a row, perfect completions without anybody dying to mobs or bosses. If the 2 who are not participating in the fight die to the boss, that doesn't count as a wipe on your side or a restart of their training method. That just means that they were being a bit careless and they ended up dying. And it also is good for them to train to avoid getting hit and avoid getting smashed up by enemies and running around, because they can play distraction and learn how to zerg in this method. So running around a boss arena like the caretaker with 1 DPS actually helping to wipe out everything will make a big difference. Obviously, if you're running musket, your secondary will be a melee, so you're going to be responsible for wiping out all the mobs and keeping the healer safe, while the tank is going to be responsible for keeping the boss on himself. The healer is going to have the difficult task of healing both the tank and that 1 DPS who she's in charge of, while the other 2 run around like monkeys, playing around with the aggro of enemies and trying to assist without killing anything. Now moving on, the next step to this training will be a 1 man to wipe out the entire room. And in this one here, all 3 DPS will wipe out that area on their own until they can do it without a death. It only requires 1 completion from them. So for example, in Genesis, the first room, it is a crazy difficult room to have to go through, and they will learn to complete it solo on their own. The tank, the healer, and the other DPS will fall back. They will stay on the bridge in the entrance area, while 1 DPS tries to clear out that entire first area. This is going to be irritating, it's going to be long, and they're most probably going to die a ton. By the time they work out a method to handle this and realize how to handle it, they would be so well adapted that doing it will not be anything trivial or minute. From this, you now have a team that is fantastically conditioned to work individually, and they're fantastically conditioned to work as a team. The 3-man tactic will still apply to the bosses because that needs to be worked and refined to a point that is unbelievably perfect. That most probably need somewhere in the region of 10 to 12 flawless completions before you consider it to be mastered. Now moving on from this, you've already done all of this and you're now ready to go on to the final stage of training should you wish to do this here. Consuls will get together and they will run dungeons on their own. So consuls and officers will run dungeons as teams of 5 to learn to work together in small group calls. Remember, you generally only have 10 teams and your teams generally aren't all different. They will give calls to each other so they can push each other to different zones, and they will each work with giving commands, because giving commands and changing tactics on the flow will help them. They're not going to play as difficult as we were speaking, they're just going to swap out different methods of clearing the room. Clear from the right, clear from the left, clear down the middle. You're going to swap to all 3 of these. Everybody is going to get a usage out of this, and everything is perfectly private. You can train people to use axes. You can train people to use great axes, war hammers, rapiers, musket, bow. Nobody will know what your weapon composition is, because when you leave the dungeon, you can change your weapon composition to everybody walking in with sword and shield. Everybody knows that tanks run in wars and run into dungeons, and people can't tell whether you are doing it for training or whether you are doing it for the dungeon, and they don't know whether you're training for mutated level 10 or whether you're training for a war. That is the beauty of getting good players. Now once you have reached the end of the training, there is something that can be done, and please bear with what I'm about to say. You put all your trophies back on and you run mutated level 10 as a team. All 5 members run in, you clash with mutated level 10, and you come out with a time. The times will tell you which groups of teams are really strong. This here will tell you how to organize your war formats and which teams have very good chemistry. This allows you to put a strong team on the map, and you can use them as individuals without having a big group conversation where all instructions are relayed in a single motion. Now, I know what I'm talking about sounds a bit difficult, but there is one other thing to do to ensure that your communication works properly. Leaders of your army group, so that means that there are only 10 of you, will form a chat, and you will sit in chat in the game. Not in the game, in Discord. On the game, you are capable of opening voice communication. Voice communication can work for all players, and this is something which allows you to work in teams of 5 plus the 10 leaders of each group to work as a group. Group 1 to 10 is already listed for you as a group number. You just have to see which group you're allocated to before you start the fight. And all you've got to do at this point is, right, let's organize our groups, and everybody open up voice comms in game. By opening up voice comms in game, your team can hear what you tell them. So you run out onto the field and you want to play a different strategy. The comms come from the commander's comms. We're going zone A capture, zone B, zone C decoy assaults. Okay, so how many people are going? 10 to zone A, 10 to zone B, 30 Zerg zone C. Right, there we go. Quick and easy, game wipe, easy, set. So that is the way that it goes. That is the plan for winning wars, and you now can deploy whatever tactics you want. Your tactics are your own. Everybody has defined their weapon art. You can change weapons randomly. You can come up with countermeasures to teams who play strategies like playing on the map and learning to do things as a team, because they only have a single play to go through, while you have performance in a single weapon and you can rely on it to take players down. The warning for this is, do not duel in the open. Do not engage in open world training for your tactics. And if you want to pull a tactic in open world, which is something I really advise against, there is a method, and it is one that is very difficult to pull off. Have 40 players or 40 members all ready to go into OPR. You will need an extra group of players ranging between 8 and 10 to go and fill up a previous OPR lobby, making 0 people in the waiting list for OPR. At this point, your entire team will jump into the OPR lobby, and all 40 of you will take up the slots at once. This year will mean that you will populate a single map, and you can have a 40-man training camp in OPR. Now obviously this requires massive numbers of players, and this requires 8 people to sacrifice themselves to fill up somebody else's lobbies to make sure that you don't have that problem when you are fighting. And by having a full 40-man team, you definitely win with that number of players. 40 players is no joke. You're going to go through that, you're going to fight, you're going to experience lag. If anybody gets kicked, you can always make it look like you're just playing OPR, playing the objectives, because there are objectives in real war. Taking out the Baron, you can count it as capturing a Zerg. You can take out big monsters. You can gather resources as part of other types of plays that you would play, running a 5-man team to do something on the back line. So they go and they farm up all of the Azoth. One person holds all the Azoth. They purchase whatever is needed to be purchased, and you'll play it out in a zone. You'll know what you're rehearsing on Discord, and that is the way that it goes. It's a simple tactic. It's a lot of work to put in, but overall, all of this is going to get you a fantastic battle-ready team. It may be a lot more difficult to implement for some companies because of low balances, but when your company has high balances, this is going to be very simple. Just about everybody in a team can host you 2 orbs at minimum per week, so every team can do 10 runs of a dungeon, and as I said, it's going to take a lot for you to master it. So 10 runs per dungeon, and you have 2 dungeons where you can train. That makes it a total of 20 runs per week. 20 runs in your 2 highest level dungeons, and once you are done with that and once you have reached the master level, it will all be about taking on mutated for your training, where you're going to try and beat the times in mutated, which nonetheless lead me to something else that I want to promote. In the description of this video is a link to a special Discord. The Discord is called Agentum Osium. Agentum Osium will help you if you have a company who's struggling with their war tactics. I will help you out a little bit. I am not limiting my help to only greens, only purples, or only yellows. If you need help with it and want to know how this is implemented, I am willing to jump in with a team of your consuls or officers. So 4 of y'all will get the instruction needed, or if you don't want me to join you in the physical dungeon, I'm willing to sit in a voice comms with you where I will watch one of your screens, and there'll be 6 of us in that entire channel, and I will help y'all through by telling y'all what to do and what to train to get y'all's weapons up to a certain level. I will not reveal which company is using what tactics, but at the end of a war, I will discuss how tactics played out, because I will do a review on wars on companies who I have trained. And that is the way that it will go. Obviously, this type of training is crazy difficult to pull off on the first try. This might take you something like 5 or 6 weeks to actually work out and get to the maximum. So I hope that you all do enjoy, and I hope that this gives you a little bit more fun in your gameplay. So see you all in the next one, and have a good day.